Have you ever found yourself lost in the wilderness, surrounded by nothing but trees and the sounds of nature? For John Davis, a seasoned hiker with years of experience in the Alaskan wilderness, it was just another regular hike until he heard the unthinkable, a bear, crying out in agony. Picture this: the soft rustling of leaves, the occasional chirp of a bird, and then a piercing, heart-wrenching cry. John stopped in his tracks, his senses heightened. Bears don't cry like that. It was a sound that echoed with pain, a sound that made his heart race. Was someone else out there in trouble? Or was it an injured animal? John had been trekking the Alaskan trails for years, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to encounter. As the cries grew louder, he followed the sound deeper into the forest. The further he went, the more desperate the cries became, until he rounded a bend and saw it. A large black bear caught in a trap. But not just any trap. This was a cruel steel jaw trap, and its teeth had sunk deep into the bear's leg. Blood dripped onto the forest floor, staining the earth a vivid red. The bear, once a majestic creature roaming free in the wild, was now a prisoner of human cruelty. John's heart sank. It was clear the bear was in distress, struggling to free itself from the trap, but the pain was too much. The animal was weak, exhausted, and terrified. It had no way of escaping. Without hesitation, John stepped forward, trying to stay calm. In all his years of hiking, he had never encountered a situation like this. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't just leave the bear to suffer. He had to help. John knew the risks. Getting close to a wounded wild animal could be dangerous, especially a bear. The animal was scared, possibly aggressive, and in pain. But he couldn't walk away. Every fiber of his being screamed that he had to do something, no matter how risky. He took a slow, deep breath, hoping his presence would calm the bear rather than provoke it. He spoke in soft, soothing tones, trying to reassure the animal. "It's okay. I'm here to help," he murmured, though he wasn't sure the bear could understand him. The bear's eyes, wide with panic, locked onto his. For a moment, John hesitated, unsure of how the animal would react. Would it lash out in fear and pain? Or would it recognize that John was trying to help? The bear's heavy breathing filled the air, its chest rising and falling rapidly with each painful breath. John could see the deep wounds on its leg where the trap had clamped down, and he knew the animal wouldn't survive much longer if it wasn't freed. With great care, John approached the bear. He made sure to keep his movements slow and deliberate, giving the animal time to process his presence. If he moved too quickly, the bear might become more frightened, and the situation could escalate. John knelt beside the bear, carefully examining the trap. It was a large industrial-grade steel trap designed to catch animals in their tracks. The bear's leg was caught in one of the jaws, and the pressure had caused the trap to clamp tightly, digging into its flesh. The metal was cold and unyielding, a cruel reminder of human interference in the wild. John had no tools with him, no way of breaking the trap open. But he couldn't give up. He had to find a way to help. Gently, he placed his hands on the trap, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. With every ounce of strength, he began to pry open the jaws of the trap. It wasn't easy. The trap was designed to be strong, to hold its prey tight, and the more John pulled, the more his muscles strained. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked, but he couldn't stop. He could see the bear's eyes watching him with a mixture of fear and desperation, and he knew that he had to act fast. Minutes seemed to stretch into hours. Every pull, every effort, felt like it was in vain. But then, with one final push, the trap began to give way. It creaked and groaned, and John's heart leaped as the jaws slowly began to open. With a final, desperate tug, the trap released. The bear's leg was free. The animal jerked its paw back, testing it gingerly. Blood still dripped from the wounds, but at least now the bear was no longer trapped. John stepped back, his breath coming in quick gasps. He had done it. He had freed the bear. But the story didn't end there. As the bear took a few steps back, its movements slow and uncertain, John couldn't help but wonder, what would happen next? Would the bear run off into the woods? Or would it stay, uncertain of what to do with its newfound freedom? As John stood there, watching the bear, he had no idea that the next moments would leave him speechless, in awe of the bond between man and beast that could form even in the most unexpected circumstances. The forest seemed to hold its breath as John stood there, staring at the freed bear. It wasn't running off as he had expected. Instead, the animal was taking tentative steps, testing its injured leg, clearly in pain, but now free from the trap that had once held it captive. John stood motionless, unsure of what would happen next. He had done the right thing. He knew that, but would the bear see it that way? For a moment, there was an eerie silence between them, no bird calls, no rustling leaves, just the sound of the bear's labored breathing. The air felt charged with anticipation. John had helped free this creature, and now he had to trust that his actions would not be met with aggression or fear. He glanced around nervously, knowing that wild animals, even when freed from danger, could be unpredictable. There was always the risk that the bear might react out of instinct, might lash out in pain or panic. But still, John felt an undeniable pull to stay. He couldn't leave now, not after everything he had just done. Taking a deep breath, John spoke softly to the bear. "It's okay," he reassured the animal, his voice gentle. "You're free now. You can go." He had no idea if the bear understood, but it seemed to respond to the calmness in his tone. As if on cue, the bear took another step back, its legs still tender but no longer trapped. For a moment, it stood there, facing John, studying him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. It was as if the bear was trying to make sense of the human who had dared to approach, to help, and now was it leaving. But then something remarkable happened. The bear, instead of running into the woods as John had anticipated, turned its head and slowly limped toward him. At first, John thought it was a mere coincidence. Perhaps the bear was simply moving in the direction of the trail. But as the animal drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. The bear wasn't retreating. It was coming closer to John. The distance between them closed slowly, the injured leg dragging slightly behind. John instinctively stepped back, unsure of what to do. He had helped the bear, but would it now see him as a threat? Or worse, would it feel cornered and act in self-defense? But the bear didn't seem afraid. It didn't growl or show any sign of aggression. In fact, it did the opposite. It stopped just a few feet away from him, looking up at John with what seemed like recognition. The moment hung in the air, heavy with emotion. John was completely still, waiting, not wanting to do anything that might startle the animal. And then, in the most unexpected and surreal moment, the bear did something that defied all of John's understanding of wild animals. The bear gently lowered its head and nudged John with its nose softly, as if in a gesture of gratitude. John's heart skipped a beat. Was he imagining this? Could a wild animal like this really be showing appreciation? The nudge was brief, just a gentle press of the bear's snout against his chest, but it was enough to leave John utterly speechless. He had freed the bear from pain and captivity, but in return, the bear had shared a moment of trust that was beyond anything he had ever expected. John stood there in a state of disbelief, his mind racing. Was this bear truly expressing gratitude? It was an animal, wild and untamed, with instincts that didn't align with human emotions. And yet, there it was, showing a tenderness and understanding that few could fathom. As the bear took a step back, it seemed to hesitate for just a moment, its eyes locking with John's one last time. Then, without warning, the bear turned away and limped into the forest, disappearing into the dense trees, leaving John alone in the clearing. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was peaceful, reflective, almost sacred. John remained standing in the same spot for several minutes, the surreal moment still fresh in his mind. He couldn't quite process what had just happened. Bears didn't show gratitude like that, did they? But in that brief moment, he had witnessed something remarkable, a connection between man and animal that transcended the wild's typical boundaries. He glanced at the spot where the bear had disappeared into the woods, feeling a sense of accomplishment, but also awe. This was no ordinary hike. This was an experience that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The bear had trusted him, allowed him to help, and in return, had shared an emotional bond that could only be described as pure. It was a lesson John would never forget. As he began to walk back down the trail, John couldn't shake the thought that this encounter was more than just a chance meeting. It was a reminder of the deeper unspoken connection that exists between humans and nature. Sometimes, even in the most unlikely situations, kindness can bridge the gap between the wild and the human heart. As John made his way back down the forest trail, his thoughts still racing from the incredible moment he had just shared with the bear, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had profoundly changed within him. He had freed the bear, yes, but what had he really set in motion? The way the bear had nuzzled him, that brief, silent communication, it was as if the boundaries between man and nature had briefly dissolved, and something deeper had occurred. But what was it? Was it simply gratitude, or was there something more? The bear's reaction had left him with more questions than answers. He knew he'd never forget this day, but he also realized that helping an animal in distress didn't come without its risks. What if the bear had reacted differently? What if it had turned on him? In the wilderness, there were no guarantees, and he had narrowly avoided a much more dangerous situation. But as John continued his hike back toward the base of the trail, his mind was suddenly interrupted by another familiar sound. This time, it was a human voice. He looked up and saw a group of fellow hikers heading toward him, one of them waving their hands. "Hey, are you okay?" one of the hikers called out as they approached. John waved back, a small smile forming on his face as he approached. "Yeah, just a crazy day. Had an interesting encounter with a bear." The hikers looked at him in surprise. "A bear? What happened?" John chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I freed it from a trap. It was stuck, and it was in a lot of pain. But I got it out, and well, it actually came up to me and nudged me. I think it was trying to thank me." The group fell silent for a moment, processing what John had said. One of the hikers, a woman named Sarah, raised an eyebrow. "Wait, you're telling me that the bear actually showed gratitude?" "Yeah, it was wild," John replied, still in disbelief. "I've been hiking for years, and I've never seen anything like it." "Well, you must have done something right," another hiker, a man named Chris, added with a grin. "Bears don't just walk up to people like that." "Sounds like you've got some wild animal magic, my friend." John laughed along with them, but a part of him still felt unsettled. He had done the right thing by helping the bear. He knew that. But he also understood that not all animals, especially wild ones, would have acted that way. He could have easily been attacked or worse, if the bear had felt threatened or scared. But somehow, despite the risks, his decision to help had been the right one. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he'd made the right choice. As they continued to chat and share stories, The group slowly made their way toward the parking area. The day had gone from a peaceful hike to a dramatic rescue, and John couldn't help but reflect on how quickly the wild could shift from calm to chaotic, even in the blink of an eye. Later that evening, as John sat in the comfort of his cabin, the events of the day continued to replay in his mind. What had started as a quiet hike through the Alaskan wilderness had turned into something much more significant. He had always felt a deep respect for the wild, but now, after freeing that bear, he felt a different kind of connection, one that went beyond respect. It was a sense of shared humanity, even with the creatures of the wild. Could it be that animals, too, experienced emotions like gratitude, or was this just an anomaly? As John reflected on the incident, his thoughts wandered back to the bear. Would it be okay? Would it survive? He couldn't help but hope the animal had found its way back to the safety of the forest, its wound healing with time. In his heart, he wished the bear well, knowing that he had done all he could to help it. But little did John know, his actions that day would soon be known to more people than he could ever imagine. As the sun began to set and the quiet of the evening settled in, he felt the weight of the day lift from his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. He had done something good. It was then that his phone buzzed with a notification. Curious, he picked it up, and his jaw nearly dropped when he saw the message. His story, his bear rescue, had been shared by someone in the hiking community online. It was already gaining traction. The simple act of freeing a trapped bear had sparked a wildfire of interest across social media. Before he knew it, John's phone was flooded with messages. Comments, likes, and shares poured in, each one praising his bravery, his kindness, and his willingness to help the animal in need. People were calling it a miracle, a heartwarming story of compassion. Some even began tagging it with the hashtag #BearRescue. John stared at the screen, both amazed and overwhelmed. What had started as a quiet, personal experience was now being celebrated by people around the world. His simple decision to help had resonated with others in ways he never expected. And yet, despite the attention, he couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was coming. The story of the bear had touched something deep within people, a reminder that compassion transcends species, that kindness is always worth the risk, and that even the wildest creatures can surprise us with their capacity for trust. John wasn't just a hiker anymore. He was now a part of something much bigger. His connection with the bear had reached beyond the woods, spreading to others who were touched by the same bond. And with that, his journey had just begun.